Okay, I'm going to give it a few more seconds for the last people coming in. I'm going to kindly ask my team to continue with admitting people as they come in. Perfect. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar hosted by the Terrascope team. The topic we will be covering today is on Science-Based Targets Initiative, but specifically, we will discuss a topic that many of our customers have raised as to be struggling with. And it is, about how do we set a decarbonization action plan, and how do you set internal targets and get the whole organization behind them. So before I introduce the speakers of today, we're actually going to go through a few housekeeping tips. And yes, perfect. Thank you, Sam. So in terms of housekeeping, I should inform all of you that the webinar is being recorded, and we will be sharing the information at the end of the session. Questions are encouraged at all times, but use the chat function. Don't use the Q&A function. So just feel free to go onto the chat, ask your questions. We will select a couple to answer at the end of the session. But some of the easier ones we will try to answer as we go in the chat. And then the ones that we cannot cover, we will send an FAQ again at the end of the session. A feedback survey will be sent, so we would appreciate your feedback, especially because we do have another webinar series starting in September. So all improvements and feedback is much appreciated. I'm Paula, your host for today, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speakers of the day. So we have Sam, who will be leading the discussion. He sits in the sustainability team as a decarbonization specialist. Before Terrascope, he has spent 5 years as a consultant and technical advisor in designing and delivering net zero strategies for big and complex multinationals, covering a wide range of sectors. And we also have Leah, who is our head of sustainability. Before joining Terrascope, she had a long career as a climate negotiator and advisor within the UN, including COP. And she's currently a member of the technical advisory group of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, as we all know. So yeah, I'm going to leave it to our speakers, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks, Paula. So moving into the session, this is what we're going to go through today. So really, we've gone through the welcome and intro. We're going to kick off the session and the content by going into how to generate organizational buy-in on SBTI. We're going to cover stakeholder expectations, whether it's your business units or key stakeholders, tangible actions to generate buy-in, and lastly, the importance of a quality greenhouse gas inventory and the role that this plays within this process. Then we'll do a really how-to on building an internal SPCA strategy. And this will again involve really practical steps. We'll present a framework which we see as being flexible and applicable to most organizations who are looking to set an SBTI. And yeah, we'll cover like play-by-play checklist that you can implement to build an internal SBTI strategy. And then we'll close up the session, think beyond SBTI, and then we'll be taking your questions. So before we dive into the main content, just 30 seconds on SBTI and why does the SBTI exist? Really, the SBTI are acting as like an external authority for organizations to validate the credibility of their science-based targets. Before the SBTI, we had no consistent and systematic way to understand if targets being set by corporates were in line with the key outcome which we're looking for, which is the Paris Agreement and the 1.5 degree pathway. So we had no validation and security around, okay, this target is credible and it's achieving the outcome that we need. So that's what the SBTI is there for, and that's a huge benefit, a huge selling point to be able to say our targets are in line with the Paris Agreement. So naturally, it's a really key target and strategic outcome for many businesses who are looking to demonstrate action on sustainability. Science-based targets are seen as the solution to that. So, taking a step back at what we see as the kind of the largest scale framework and what we want to take you through. This is what we see as the typical science-based target setting process. There's socialization of the idea internally. Once everyone's on board with the SPTI ambition, the organization moves into the nuts and bolts, developing detailed action plans and doing the analysis, doing the legwork to say, okay, yeah, we've got the strategy in place, and then they can transition to submitting a science-based target. What does this look like in a kind of step-by-step process? Here we have those 3 phases and a typical 10-step process, which takes normally 4 to 6 months, should we say. And really, I think we've tried to create this framework so it has enough flexibility and general characteristics that can be applied to most organizations. The way that we've chosen to structure this is doing the analysis and planning before submitting a science-based target. Some organizations who are more centralized and have more control and confidence and want to get this in early, they sometimes submit the science-based target and then do all the action planning afterwards. So here you would see step 10 being where step 4 is now, and doing the analysis afterwards. But we think that this is the more common approach to setting the science-based target. So really, going by step, we see businesses normally start with what we call a soft start, where socialization really begins, and the concept and ambition is discussed internally in a rather informal setting. Then the program's formally kicked off. Leadership and sustainability communicate the ambitions internally and really begin that step 3, which is the consultation. They engage the key functions and stakeholders, whether that be business units, functions, product lines, or geographies, however is most relevant for the business, to get their views on the science-based target ambition, resolve any clarifications, and hopefully fully socialize the idea, and in essence get everyone on board for the science-based target. Then with those steps completed, organizations typically go into work stream planning, so devising a formal plan on how to achieve the SPTI, getting up to the SPTI submission stage. What is going to be the corporate and step down business unit approach? Who's going to be doing what at what time scale to get to that point of being able to submit a science-based target. Once that plan has been established, it's up to the leadership and sustainability team to really articulate the requirements, especially on the business units, again, geographies or key product lines, for example, around what is it you expect from them, what's their role going to be, and what's your role as a central function, as a leadership or sustainability team. With that ask articulated, business units go into initial action planning. So here they devise a first draft action plan, which they see fulfills the requirements been requested to them by the leadership and sustainability team. Progressing to step 7, we go into action plan refinement. So these plans are reviewed by the group, the central team, typically the sustainability team, who establish any gaps, any work-ons, any iteration that's required, and work with the BUs to develop a final draft BU level plan. And then the last stage of the building that internal strategy, all of those BU level plans, however that's been structured, it might be 5 business units or it might be 15. They're all consolidated with the analysis and research that's gone into this from, again, the constituents of the business into one single view to say, okay, This is what we're going to do on a corporate scale. This is what we anticipate our progress going to be against the SBTI, and this is where we have more work to do. And this is presented to the leadership and hopefully signed off. With this internal strategy formalized, the plan is communicated wide scale internally to typically to all employees, business units, and to the degree of disclosure they want, confirming remaining tasks and the long-term strategy. And with all this achieved, then the sustainability team can go into the process with confidence and the backing of the business to submit the science-based target, gathering the data, completing the paperwork, and booking that validation slot. That's what we see as the typical science-based target setting process. One major barrier that we see to completing these 10 steps is organizational buy-in. When the proposal of science-based targets are put to the business and the key functions who are going to be delivering the plan, because it's going to be up to them to deliver the reductions, not the sustainability team. Sometimes there's strong resistance, uncertainty, skepticism around if this is right, if it's possible, what's the degree of support, so forth. All these different sources to lack of confidence in this decision and this process can come about, and this is where core teams have to say, okay, how can we generate this organizational buy-in? How can we give our stakeholders and our business units confidence that this is the right thing, and our approach is robust, so that you can all work together and achieve the plan and realize your SBTI strategy. Given that, we're going to talk about key, in this part of the presentation, key actions that you can do to generate that organizational buy-in. So you're in the socialization stage and you want to generate that buy-in. What are your stakeholders expecting when it comes to SBTI in order to back it? Here we present 8 prerequisites, key prerequisites for organizational buy-in. We're going to do a deep dive on 5 of these in this webinar, but really, the 8 that we see are, first of all, belief that setting the science-based target is right for the business. Quite self-explanatory, but sometimes business units, key stakeholders aren't certain that setting an SBTI fits within the corporate-wide strategy. So we're going to go into some actions you can take to align that vision and with SBTI and provide that confidence that it is the right thing to do. Second of all, it's confidence in the planning and research that will inform the corporate-wide strategy. Your stakeholders want certainty and confidence that the homework's been done. It's there's a clear approach and it's all of the externalities have been accounted for, and there's a really robust plan to achieving this. Number 3, they're expecting transparency and collaboration internally on SBTI. They want complete visibility on the process and understanding, how does their role fit within the larger process, and are they being treated the same as other business units? Because that can be a concern that some business units might get more leeway when it comes to ambition, stringency required. Number 4, confidence in the corporate GHG inventory, really important one, and we'll do a deeper focus on this. But this is all about giving your stakeholders the insights and knowledge available to develop a robust plan. If you don't have confidence in the inventory, then planning is going to be weak. So it's definitely one to work towards. Number 5, understanding clearly their role and the requirements on them. If the scope of the task ahead is really clear and there's a really clear problem statement and your business units have the tools available to fulfill that, then you're really empowering them to deliver on that ask and create a robust plan. 6, assurance of investment in decarbonisation plans. Quite obvious, but realising the SBTI, especially the decarbonisation pathways required, is going to require investment, both energy, financially, and general investment and commitment from the business. So they're going to need that assurance so that they can have the backing to go ahead. Number 7, they're expecting the backing of the leadership to prioritize decarbonisation. Especially, there's going to be decisions, on a regular basis, whether it's decarbonisation or an alternative business objective. So they're going to want that backing to say, okay, obviously depending on a case-by-case basis, but I'm going to be given the license to prioritize decarbonisation and realise the target which I've been given. And lastly, and really important, they're expecting autonomy both in the planning stage and execution. Ownership is really important in any business function and business target, and achieving an SBTI is no different. If you give your business units autonomy, ownership, and responsibility for both delivering the plan and realizing the outcomes, you're really empowering them to take it on and attack it with their full force. So those are the 8 prerequisites. We're going to dive into the 5 highlighted with the orange border around really tangible actions you can do to strengthen these prerequisites. First of all, belief that setting a science-based target is right. What can you do? Well, we recommend having strong and consistent messaging from the leadership that sustainability is a really core objective of the business, and that it aligns with other messaging around what the business is trying to do and the long-term strategy. Improving literacy on climate change and sustainability with employee engagement and training. Number 2, bolstering confidence in the work done today and the research that will inform the SBTI. Having clear and consistent communication, the ambition and the research to date is a really recommended action. Giving dedicated ownership of sustainability within the business and by leadership, so that the rest of the business can see this is being adequately owned by some serious stakeholders and leadership in the business. And lastly, related to the previous point as well, communication of how this aligns and how the SBTI is really important to the wider strategy. Number 4, providing confidence in the corporate GHG inventory. What can you do? So we see 5 actions you can take. First of all, going from left to right, building a compliant GHG inventory with quality and granular approaches. So again, the more insights that you can give and the more robust and clarity you can provide in the inventory, the more your stakeholders can believe, yes, we've got the data and the insights to really build an impactful plan. Second, providing BUs with sufficient opportunity and complete access to interrogate the inventory. Giving them time and the access will allow them to say, yep, I don't have any uncertainties with the data and the methodology taken. Something that's really helpful is overlaying the decarbonisation pathway on the existing inventory. So not only presenting the inventory, but the journey ahead and the requirement ahead, which we talk to later in the second half of the presentation, is a really great way of providing that complete picture of this is where we are and this is where we need to get to. Naturally, being transparent in the methodology, so your stakeholders can look into this as well during their interrogation of the data. And the best way, most important way, in my opinion, to get your BUs confident in the data is really having them being central to the process itself. And this is obviously really common, but having them involved in data collection means they can completely understand the process, and the teams involved don't require massive onboarding into what's been underlying the process. Number 5, understanding clearly the role and the requirements on the stakeholders. What can you do to really give them this? Provide clear, non-technical guidance on the SBTI, really simplifying it and speaking English on the topic. Communication, really clear communication of desired outcomes, make them as smart as possible so the BUs know, okay, this is exactly what I need to do, this is when I need to do it, this is how I'm going to be measured. Provide consistent support. Don't leave them on their own. Bring them along with you and help them fulfill those requirements. And related to that last point, provide example plans, templates which you want them to complete. Make it as easy as possible for your business units to fulfill the requirements. And that's really important because you get a consistent set of deliverables back so that you can consolidate them easily. So that's a real quick win, really important one. I recommend there to enable your business units to engage as much as possible and fill in the blanks. Last one we're going to discuss is autonomy in planning and execution. So how can you give your business units this independence and sense of ownership on their decarbonisation plan? Well, communicate that intention. Go from top left to bottom right. Communicate that intention for BUs to own the responsibility of the plan. Have BUs be part of the presentation and feedback to leadership for sustainability, leadership and sustainability for input. Related to this, give them sufficient time to fully engage in this process. If you give your BUs a month or two to really compile really quality plans, chances are they're going to go say, yeah, we can give this a really good shot. Leave with us and we'll feedback to them. So really recommend giving them some sufficient time. And lastly, KPIs is going to play a part in your SBTI strategy. So consult your BUs on these because this will be a fast development. It won't be something you develop over 5 years. It'll probably be something you immediately integrate, decarbonisation KPIs. So consult your business units on the nature of these targets. So I know we haven't gone through all 8, but what we'd be really interested to know from everyone in the call, and just taking 30 seconds, having what we've discussed right now, we'd be really interested to know in the chat, which prerequisites do you think resonate most with your business and your current stage in the science-based target process? Which do you think offer the best opportunity for you to generate organizational buy-in? We'd love to hear your views. Just put a number in the chat, 1 to 8. Be really interested to hear which ones resonate with you, because there's a chance we could go on to that later. And I see we've had some questions, some activity in the chat. Try to clarify these current questions. So 1, okay, belief. That's very interesting. So getting some consistent messaging is going to be important. Oliver, 4, 7, and 2. Yeah. Interesting. There's lots of 1s. Okay. 4 seems to be common. And belief as well. That's really interesting. So executive, we're going to talk about this, but executive sponsorship is really important. So we'll cover this. 1, 5, 6, 7 from Adam. Belief, understanding the role, assurance, and investment. Yeah, investment can be a barrier if the business isn't prepared. Articulating the ask. Okay, good. We go on to this. Right. Interesting. No, really interesting insights and feedback from everyone. We're going to talk about some of these points in a more tangible, step-by-step process. So that's great to see. Particular, we're going to have another little focus deep dive on prerequisite number 4, trust in the inventory, and that Terrascope, we believe, having a really qualitative, granular, and platform-based inventory is really important. And these are some of the benefits we think you could have. So 3 key pillars we see, key benefits you could realize. First of all, you can have clear alignment with relevant guidance and standards. This means clear understanding on the SBTI requirements and guidelines, confidence in any inclusions or exclusions, and improved auditability, minimize continuity risks, and support your assurance objectives. So, if things are Excel based, these things grow arms and legs, personnel leave, and then the original purpose methodology sometimes gets lost in these Excels. So a platform-based solution can really help give your business confidence in the inventory. Number two, pillar two, improved collaboration, stakeholder engagement. Yeah, this is what this is all about. A quality inventory gives you and the business units, all the stakeholders involved, the insights they need to take ownership, to have ownership and responsibility. So we really recommend pushing quality and granularity in your inventory to say, okay, we can give our people the insights they need. Related to this allows for meaningful engagement with your suppliers, which for any business, category 3.1, scope 3 is a massive emissions category. So again, insights are now for an external stakeholder, but it's really important. And lastly, a quality inventory can really help add value to other business objectives. It doesn't have to be a burden. It can really help other things as well. So you can help bolster the business case for this inventory with, realizing things like operational efficiency or supplier relationships. If you can really demonstrate credibility on GHG accounting and sustainability. And the last pillar, data accuracy, speed and auditability. Naturally, smart platform-based solution reduces the platform time, processing time immensely. This reduces the calculation burden on your data providers, which I imagine is a huge barrier for every business. You need data from all over the business. It's usually done, 4 or 5 o'clock on a Friday when they've been doing the rest of their core job. And this could lead to mistakes, inconsistencies, and delays in the process and risks. So that's why we think having a platform-based solution which does things consistently and just takes the data and does the calculations already is something which could give your business units trust and support for the inventory. So something to consider. So that's taking a step back. We've done a whistle-stop tour of the the prerequisites for organizational buy-in. Now we're going to talk about really what we see as the most technical, difficult, and stressful part of the SBTI strategy, and that's this middle phase. So this is the building the internal SBTI strategy phase, steps 4 to 8. So we can see here, that these are really the most technical parts of the process, and we're going to have step by step for each one. What are you trying to achieve? Who's doing what? Would like to emphasize again that there's flexibility here. You might want to add steps, remove them, or do things in a different order. This is just an example framework that hopefully brings some color and brings some life and gives you a direction to where to go next. So, recapping, we've done a socialization. Probably most of our stakeholders have generally bought in, and now we're moving into the work stream planning. This is what we suggest you do. So really, here you're trying to, at the end of this task or stage of the process, you want a clear plan to getting the SPCI submission done. This has been created, and all relevant stakeholders know what they're doing, and they're aware of the timescales. So there's a clear approach with everybody knowing what they're doing, and the key stakeholders have been involved. How do we achieve this key outcome? We recommend determining the target submission date and working backwards. Quite simple, choosing a date, 5 to 9 months, depending on the urgency, complexity of the business, how fast you want to move, and maybe how much more stakeholder engagement you need to do. This should probably be done by the leadership to say, we want to do it by this date, and then you work backwards to create a plan. Next, you create an SBTI sponsorship group, an internal team to drive this work stream. So your SBTI sponsorship group should be leadership, C-suite, or just outside of C-suite, central to the business, and will really help you prioritize this action alongside other business tasks and objectives and help remove blockers to make sure the plan is realized. Then the sustainability team should review the corporate GHG inventory, the one which will form the baseline, and identify the key constituents, the key, how would you break up the pie chart of your inventory into your 5 or 15, that kind of size, a manageable size of stakeholders, to say, okay, this group, if they each had a decarbonisation plan which was credible and they were bought in, we'll do really well on SPTI. So sustainability teams should say, okay, this is basically how we want to manage our science-based target, and these are the stakeholders who are going to do it. Next, knowing who to engage, having a sponsorship group and the date we're working for. The sustainability team should draft a proposed plan, define the roles and within the business, and identify some clear timescales. Then the sustainability team naturally should socialise this plan with key stakeholders, take their views, clarifications, integrate this feedback, and update the plan. You might get some feedback that this business unit are on a key strategy or transformation program for a month. They won't be able to engage during this period. How can we navigate these problems? So I really recommend not putting the plan directly, enforcing it onto your stakeholders, but socializing it with them and taking their feedback and updating accordingly. So at this stage, you have a really clear plan. Everybody knows what they're doing, and everyone's happy to go ahead in this project. What next? Well, now you have to define the ask, and a key outcome here we're trying to achieve is that all relevant BUs that we identified in stage 4, they're equipped with the information and tools to create the decarbonisation plan, to solve the problem statement which you're putting to them, and this will ultimately support the science-based target strategy. So unfortunately, this was the responsibility of the sustainability team, but really the first task here should be researching the applicable SBTi guidance. Every industry sector is different. There's different qualifiers and characteristics which you might be exposed to. So do the research, identify any specific requirements, and within these, the SBTi standards and the target setting tools, you'll see things like the required decarbonisation pathways you have to meet. So obviously a really important piece of information. Then forecast business as usual. This means applying a generic business-wide growth forecast to each BU inventory. If you have specific insights for each BU, then go ahead and integrate those. But what we're trying to do here is extrapolate the current state of emissions, the current baseline, to the target submission date, so we can see this is the business as usual, this is the path we're on without action. Next, you go ahead and create the first draft internal targets. So what you've done in the research, you've identified your required decarbonisation pathways within the SPT setting tools and the standards, and you overlay these within the forecasted BAE emissions forecasts. So now we have 3 really important pieces of information. We have the current inventory, the baseline, where the business is going, and then where the business needs to go in order to meet the SBTi. Quick caveat here, you might want to tailor your internal targets based on characteristics relevant to your business. If you have a business unit which you feel is in a market which is more poised to decarbonisation, you might want to give them a bigger slice of the pie, not just straight materiality. So let's say you feel like North America or your rice business unit or your logistics team, they make up 10% of your emissions, but there's more scope there or less scope. You might want to give them 15% of your target to really increase the likelihood. Of course, consult them on these views and communicate this. So with these 3 pieces of information, you've established the decarbonisation gap between where you're going and where you need to be. The gap between those 2 points is the remainder of emissions that you need to decarbonize. You've essentially articulated the ask here. You have this decarbonisation gap you need to get to. You need to make the request that your business units, the stakeholders you've identified, we want you to go away and develop a decarbonisation plan. To do this, we touched upon giving them the tools. This is where you do this. So you publish the BU GHG inventories as granular and as maximum accessibility as possible on the inventory and the methodology. Train them on interpreting the inventory. Don't leave them, don't just chuck it over the fence. And yet train them, give them the insights they need to do some decarbonisation planning, so that they have the tools and the understanding to fulfil the ask. And related to this, provide ongoing support, both in their planning and interpreting the inventory, which is, we're going to touch upon in the next slide. So yeah, as I said earlier, you need to research the applicable SBTi guidance and get those decarbonisation pathways. Best way to do this is to go into the guidance and the science-based target setting tools, and get the information, input your base year data as it is, and get this information. And then we do this at Terrascope, or you could do it offline as well. And this could be an example of publishing a granular inventory. This could be a dashboard to give your business units the insights they need to identify the levers, or the teams which make up their business unit, who should they engage on which part of their emissions. And lastly, this could be an example of the forecast you do. So you forecast for that top line, the business as usual emissions. You could overlay the SPCA near-term pathway, and you might have some custom targets as well. As I said, this is the kind of format you should be looking for into doing that really critical BAU forecast, SPCA trajectory, and establishing that decarbonisation gap. So again, here's some really good examples of things you should be looking to do in giving your business units the right information and tools available. Moving on, you then move on to initial action planning. Here, what we're trying to do is create a first draft of BU decarbonisation plans. How do you do this? So BUs review their GHG inventory. With the support you've given them, they identify emissions hotspots. You might already want to do this from the get-go, and they research potential decarbonisation levers to tackle their emissions. Because they know their business best, they'll have a really good understanding of how to nudge the needle, operationally and strategically. Where sustainability comes in is supporting BUs in quantifying the levers, the impact of these in real terms, typically in tons of CO2 decrease, if possible. Some levers, it's going to be really hard to quantify credibly. You don't want to try and quantify every lever if it's, if you have really low certainty, because it's quite dependent on external factors, or complex, or there's not a clear defined intervention planned of how it would work, but you want to implement that lever. So yeah, you would try and quantify those, organize those levers into a plan for your BUs, and help them structure those into a first draft plan, and they will submit these plans to sustainability. And then you end up in action plan refinement. So sustainability should review the submitted BU decarbonisation plans, evaluate the size of the remaining decarbonisation deficit, and really evaluate risk. So if there's still a big slice of the pie to decarbonise, how much does that jeopardise an SBTi ambition? Then sustainability should provide feedback on the rationale, the action plan efficacy, and suggest improvements for the plan, and any additional initiatives as well. Given this, BUs should then review and implement the sustainability team feedback, and iterate these plans as required. Lastly, let's say the BUs, they've drafted their final decarbonisation plans, they submit them to the sustainability team. We get into the final review and roadmap stage. So here the sustainability team should take a step back and think, okay, we've got good BU level, stakeholder level plans. Is there anything on a group wide level which we should implement, which these stakeholders don't have exposure to, so that you're covering your bases there? A good example would be governance measures. Next, sustainability should consolidate all of these BU level action plans into a single organizational wide program and roadmap, and aggregate all of the quantitative, qualitative insights needed for the presentations to leadership, to give them confidence that the analysis has been conducted and they understand each BU's approach and the relative contribution of the decarbonisation leaders. Next, the first senior level engagement takes place. So sustainability team should present the corporate wide roadmap that's been drafted to their sponsorship group. This is a really good, dry run presentation to leadership, and they should be given all the analysis on the decarbonisation plans and take any feedback and naturally implement it. Once this has taken place, the sponsorship group should present this plan, this corporate-wide roadmap, and again, BU level plans as appropriate to the leadership for sign-off. And if that goes well, you can get the green light for the SPTI submission, or you might need clarifications. You might need some feedback to iterate that plan further. But that's really going from the workstream planning stage all the way to that final corporate-wide view of getting a corporate-wide SPTI strategy and a roadmap signed off with hopefully granular plans underpinning them from each BU. So, and this might be an example plan which you could put together at the corporate-wide level. So you can see here, it's quite clear types of initiatives being implemented, when, across which part of the business. So this could be an example plan that you finish on after your BU level engagement. So we've gone through the 10 stages throughout this whole presentation. We've done a deep dive on what we feel is the most technical and challenging part, which is that the analysis and roadmap development. Again, these are flexible and you can change these as you feel best. We'll be happy to kind of discuss with you your thoughts or any questions you might have on this. I think really that's everything we'd like to go through today in terms of content. Let me hand over to Paula and Leah for some closing remarks on what next and taking a step back to the wider journey.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks to everyone for great engagement in the chat. So, we basically selected this topic, setting science-based targets, by popular demand, and rather than focusing it on a, oh, sorry, Sam, there's a bit of an echo. So rather than focusing it on training on the Science-Based Targets Initiative kind of procedures and guidelines, we really decided to focus on steps that sustainability teams can take to socialize climate ambition across the company. And so I focus on this organizational buy-in because the how-to of filling out the paperwork and the tools that go into a SPTI submission, basically across the finish line, it's fairly straightforward. We saw the kind of screenshot of the SPTI tool, and it's really about the qualitative data and the quantitative data and the methodologies. But the challenging part is getting everyone in the company to understand the implications of what a net zero target means and everybody's role in delivering that ambition and what the next best actions that they can take. So that's really the marathon, and SPTI is getting over the finish line. And I think we saw that a lot with the inputs in the chat, with the one around like kind of aligning stakeholders, building that vision and getting that why. So I think in in building the buy-in during the measurement and target setting phase, it's really going to help with shifting towards the company meeting the target. And just to kind of paint the picture and looking ahead, like once that SPCA submission is made, what comes next? And it's really the kind of implementation. So Science-Based Targets Initiative is expanding its scope to go beyond just target setting to actually include tracking and reporting progress against targets to maximize transparency and comparability. What that means is it will give companies more clarity on what does kind of responsible disclosure of progress towards the target look like, and when can a company credibly claim that the target has been achieved. So it's going to provide a lot more clarity and consistency, and so ultimately will be a helpful thing. And this accountability framework that the Science-Based Targets Initiative is developing will be added to the corporate net zero standard probably this year, which the standard is updated from time to time. So there's going to be more focus, not just on target setting, but also what comes next. And so this process that Sam's walked you through is really important for thinking ahead about across that finish line for target setting, actually realizing those results. In practice, some of the areas we're expecting to see changes are around when or what thresholds will trigger a company's base year recalculation. So when the remeasurement needs to be done in the base year, because that affects target coverage. So the SPCA guidelines on 95% of scope 1 and 2 and 67% of scope 3. So kind of rebaselining is something that's going to be done fairly often as companies grow structurally and methodologies change. The second area is really looking at non-greenhouse gas emission indicators to give a picture of progress. So we've already actually seen in the chat some questions around, these areas can be hard to influence. So if a company takes an action to change a supplier engagement or an investment policy, that could be a sign of progress, but it hasn't resulted in emissions reduction yet. So actually, Science-Based Targets Initiative is looking at what are kind of non-GHG indicators of progress, because the emissions may not be a linear relationship with that. And then finally, looking at third-party assurance requirements for target-related data. So it's a lot, right? So I think a question that comes up is, well, with all of this kind of challenge around target setting and follow-up, are companies walking away from science-based targets? And what we're really seeing is, in fact, it's doubling down. It's because it's the credibility and because we're in this window of urgent action on climate change. There's an amazing uptake on Science-Based Targets Initiative, and as kind of very progressive companies start engaging their suppliers, we're seeing much more action throughout the supply chain. And so it's kind of rigorous, it's challenging, but it is kind of driving uptake, and it's ultimately driving the action that we need to see to address climate. So I want to thank Sam and everyone for and you, the attendees, for joining. I have the privilege of moderating the Q&A, so I'm going to take notes. We kind of are a little bit short on time, but I would like to take a couple of the questions. So we had a question around if a company works primarily with other organizations and there is little autonomy over their partners' activities, how can the company form an SBT aligned strategy? So the first thing I would say, really, and I'll invite Sam as well to jump in if you want to, it's a very common challenge to feel powerless to influence scope 3 emissions. It kind of, as you start to dig in and see where it is, this is a common challenge. So first of all, you're definitely not alone, and having kind of peer groups like this are really important to troubleshoot ideas and discuss. Some tips, kind of general, not specific to any business, but really prioritization is crucial. So once you understand when you have this evidence-based strategy and you have a sense of where your emissions hotspots are, and you can then prioritize, okay, I understand that this kind of area of scope 3 is my biggest exposure. I can also look at what are my relationships like with those other kind of, I think, partners that you reference. So is it a good relationship? Are they aware of and ready to engage on climate change? And so actually using not just the hotspot, but also kind of the relationship with the suppliers can be a great way to help build a quick win And once the company gets through that process of building a relationship and able to kind of impact that towards climate action, it can build momentum. And so looking for some quick wins is really helpful. I think also leaning on the people within your company that have the relationships with those partners. Really the kind of, it goes with, it sounds cheesy, but trusting the process of climate action planning, going through that process, even if you don't know the exact destination that Sam outlined, has been done at all levels, at government level, at city level, in many different spheres. And it's designed to kind of bring people along, and stakeholders internally with the operational knowledge of those relationships with partners can actually have amazing ideas about how to influence emissions reduction, whether that's an internal action like a policy change or a kind of external action that a supplier needs to take. And so these insights can be codified in policies and kind of standard operating procedures. And as Terrascope, we have examples where kind of a hotspot was a capital good and we switched to a lease model. And so, yeah, and that came from kind of the tech team, right? So you can look at really relying on people who are responsible for those areas of emissions. The second question is around, did you want to add in anything on that, Sam?
I would shortly add, think about leveraging like joint peer groups and identifying shared challenges which you have within your value chain. And so let's say if you work primarily with other businesses, you only make up a small part of their kind of business. Can you work with your peers to ask them, do you work with this supplier, or do you have this customer? We're trying to work with them to achieve this outcome. Is this something you're interested to? And to build the business case further by bringing your peers along and saying, it's not relevant to just me, it's relevant to the rest of your customers. Does this make this more? Does this make the business case for decarbonisation better? So I think there's a lot more uncertainty there, as you said, Leah. But I think working with your peers and there's a good example of the Scope 3 peer group. I think that's a good solution to try and nudge the needle with your key partners. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Great, thanks. So the next question is around clarification on the use of carbon credits in SPCA strategies. So great question. So this is an area that, well, it's a bit under flux because the greenhouse gas protocol is revising in the process of developing its land sector and removals guidance, which basically for the first time lets companies count removals within their value chain as within their greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And that feeds into the target setting process. I should say that the removals can only be counted with a number of safeguards, including ongoing monitoring systems. And there's kind of a checklist that you have to go through. It's a simple checklist, but it's really kind of complex and rigorous things to meet. So if a company invests in the monitoring and quantification of the carbon removals, then that can count in the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That also feeds into the target setting. So actually the Science Based Targets has already published its guidance on FLAG, which is the forestry, land use, and agriculture. So within a company's value chain, those carbon removals that follow the kind of the safeguards can be removed against the emissions for that FLAG sector. So you've basically got two different targets, energy and industry, and the forestry and land use target. And removals can count as netted against those targets. So there's an opportunity for removals within the value chain. And the Science Based Targets is now preparing additional guidance on the optional removals or beyond the value chain. And so it's not, it's voluntary by companies until, as Rose rightly pointed out, until the net zero target, in which case there's a threshold that a company can only offset up to 10% of the emissions, the energy and industry emissions in in that year, and the percentage is slightly different for the agriculture sector target. So what it means is in the short term, the focus is really on reducing emissions, and longer term, those very hard to abate sectors will be able to be offset. And the science-based target initiative, the SPCA kind of idea of doing this is that actually there's a lot of technology that can be taken up within the value chains to reduce emissions. And so we should be focusing on those reductions in the short term. So that's kind of the scientific context, and some clarity around carbon credits. And Sam, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, I would. It's a valid question. I'd prioritize decarbonisation planning, review the SBTi flag guidance and the greenhouse gas land sector guidance to be brought up to speed with the removals, and yeah, the requirements you'd have to meet in order to account and report those and account those for a target, if the guidance qualifies to you. But I think a good use of time and energy and investment is focusing on decarbonisation, and if the landscape changes on carbon credits, then it does. But I don't think that's happening.
Yes, with the caveat that there's a lot, there's some of it draft. And then we've got 3 minutes, and I'm looking, well, 3 minutes from our extended session. So probably we can take we can provide a real life case study of Asian or Singapore companies adopting SBTi. In particular, there is, I can name right off the bat that Olam, the parent group, has actually set the target. And then there are companies that have, a lot of companies have committed to setting targets, in which case you have 24 months to actually submit and get your target validated before you're flagged on the website as non-compliant to SBTi. And so a lot of companies have submitted their intention to set targets, and now we're seeing, that's why I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. The other ones we could probably take offline. Thank you so much for your really great questions and excellent participation, and I'll hand back over to Paula.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Sam. That was an amazing session. And yes, I relate to some of the comments saying very informative but daunting. But hey, we're all here to do this together. And we do have another series coming up in September where we're actually going to deep dive into not just SBTi, but flag, product carbon footprint, and some other topics that are really resonating with our customers at the moment. So do look forward to that. We will be sharing the materials of today, both the recording and the slides. Just give us a couple of days. But those should be coming in via your email. And last but not least, you do have Climate Cafe podcast available on your iTunes or your Spotify. We cover loads of other topics there, more around policy, and we bring in guests. It's led mainly by Leah's team, so definitely a good listening in the meantime for this summer. And yeah, please do feel free to get in touch with us for any questions or feedback. We will be sending a feedback form, as well as we will cover the questions that we have not been able to answer today. I think there's 1 or 2 left, so we will make sure to cover those. Thank you, and have an amazing rest of your day or evening. Bye, everyone.